This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to In or Out, a rapid-fire game where we discuss a handful of NBA topics and determine where we stand. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by my co-hosts Corey Walsh and Jackson Flickinger, and not even the presence of LeBron James and the Kardashians, at least one Kardashian, could lift Cleveland to a Game 4 victory. We are on a tight schedule today, so we're going to have to keep this thing moving quickly. We'll have plenty of time to discuss everything that we've seen in this series and the season as a whole on Wednesday, if that proves to be the last game of the year. But let's start with Darius Garland, who had 30 points and 7 assists last night, 12 of 27 shooting. With Donovan Mitchell on the sidelines, we saw DG kind of adjust his approach in a way that we haven't seen him act this postseason, really, not very often throughout the year at all. So are you in or out on the way DG approached last night's game?
I am in. He took shots, which is what you wanted. I think he needed more, though. There were some times where there's one play in particular that really stands out where Horford was on Okoro all evening and he ran a screen with him, and there was like a brief window that he had, and instead of taking the pull-up jumper, he decided to dribble inside and then passed out to Okoro, who was open, but it wasn't Okoro's day. Really, this whole playoffs hasn't really been his day for outside shooting. So there are things that I think he still
we will
needs
always
to
have the
improve
first half of game
because
one.
I think he's right. Well, I think kind of like he doesn't. I don't think he has the size to be a playoff performer in the sense of being somebody who can dominate the ball entirely, and he needs to do a better job of picking his windows. And I think plays like that were examples of he needs to take that shot from the outside, especially because the Cavs, which we can talk about later, uh, they have a lot of fake good shooters, and I think that's come true in the playoffs where they're not hitting their shots. And one of the guys who is not a fake good shooter and is actually a good shooter is Darius Garland, and he needs to be taking all the outside shots he can.
Yeah, I felt like that game was more like as the game went on, I felt like he kind of got more comfortable. It seemed like in the first quarter we were going to go through the Darius Garland won't show up type of performance, and he was just hiding, it felt like, for the whole first quarter. And then as the game went along, it kind of, I feel like, settled with him that he realized that this team is going to get where it needs to go. It needs to be on his shoulders because Mobley, like Garland, didn't really come out of the game strong either. So I felt like as the game progressed and then eventually at the end, Darius was the one taking the more important shots as the game ended, which I feel like is where he should have been mentally the entire game. And when you look at the box score, that is what it reflects. I mean, I think he had somewhere around like 30 attempts total, somewhere around there. Yeah. And overall, I felt like he got where he needed to be. It just took longer than I think the box score would really indicate that it took. It makes it feel like the whole game, if someone shoots 27 attempts, they were dialed in aggressively the entire time. And it felt like they really reaped the benefits of those attempts because it felt like a lot of the momentum shifts were due to Darius Garland converting on those attempts more than when he was hiding.
Yeah, I believe he had 0 points in the first quarter. Did not start the game very well. Clearly turned it up in the second quarter. Cavs Twitter was on my ass for saying that I liked the way DG was playing in that quarter. I don't know why people were so upset. I get that he started the game poorly, but to end that second quarter, he scored or assisted on 15 of their last 18 points. He really was the driving force behind that run they went on to make it a game. I just thought that he was playing with the aggression that we've been begging to see from him. Like, I saw a lot of people who were still, you know what, actually, it wasn't a lot of people. A lot of people seemed pleasantly surprised by the way Garland played tonight. There were very few people who were upset with it, but there were some people who were still mad. And it's like, what do you want from this guy? He took 27 shots. We've been begging for him to shoot more. And yet there's still some people saying, oh, he was taking too many shots, blah, blah, blah. This is what we wanted to see. I understand, like, someone's already probably typing in the comments like, well, we want to see him lead us to a win. Well, guess what? They were winning games when he was scoring 15 points, and that wasn't how we wanted him to play. So it's stupid to use that as a way to view how he's playing, whether they won or lost. I thought Garland played really good last night. Probably the second best playoff game he's ever played. It wasn't enough. They weren't able to get over the hump. He did miss a couple shots down the stretch, but I thought he was making quick decisions all night, which is what we want to see from him. I think he was being aggressive. He was playing with the pep in his step, and I'm very happy with the way he approached that game.
I do agree with everything that you're saying, even though was a little hard on him. I think this reminded me of the play-in games that he had in 2022, where they weren't the most efficient games, but you don't efficiency is great in the playoffs, but you need your best player to step up and take those shots, and I think he was doing that. I just think he could have taken
I do agree with
more
that.
threes.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with both you guys said there. I think he could have taken more threes, especially, and he kind of deferred in stretches during that game, but I still was very overall happy with how he played.
And they were hitting shots in the first quarter. They made 6 of their first 7 threes. It wasn't like the offense was just begging for him to step up and he was just not doing it in the first quarter. The offense was humming. It was the defensive end of the court that was bad. They let 38 points in the first quarter. So, I think when they needed him to step up, he did. And it wasn't like there were a couple times where I think he, when he doesn't take the shot, it's like, well, now you give the license to Caris LeVert to take the shot. Now you give license to Max Strus to do something dumb. So he could have done more, but we're going to take this.
I feel like Darius kind of this first quarter was kind of the embodiment of his mentality problem. I feel like we all think he kind of has, where if the team's flowing offensively, like they're hitting 6 out of 7 threes, Darius isn't the type of guy that's like, all right, I'm going to try to get mine in here. It's like, all right, well, everyone else is cooking, so why don't I just defer? And he kind of I feel like initially always thinks to defer now because of his pairing with Donovan. Usually Cavs games start with Donovan Mitchell trying to get his early. Darius Garland very rarely starts games with that mentality. And it kind of felt like he defaulted into that in this game, and then quickly realized when we weren't going ballistic from 3-point range that it was like, oh, I guess I should probably try to get my own here.
Yeah, I agree with both of what you guys were saying there. Moving into our next topic, and kind of similar, Cavs have been asking for more out of Evan Mobley. They've needed him to score now that Jarrett Allen is on the sidelines, and especially with Mitchell out of the game as well. I think he's done a respectable job over his last 3 games, but it's clearly been an adjustment. So are you in or out on what we have seen from Mobley?
I'm in because I feel like he's building a template for what this team could look to build around him in years to follow. But overall, it's this game in particular, he had a fine game. I would say around B range. I didn't feel like he really did anything overly special. I felt like the team kind of ignored him in certain sets towards the end of the game. He had mismatches on White a few times. And it felt like with the way that the game was going, they just didn't even consider him offensively. They're like, I'd rather Max Strus could have, instead of taking that terrible shot that was heavily contested with a minute and a half left, he could have looked and saw Mobley on Derek White down low. But I feel like just from the way that the season has gone for Evan Mobley, they very rarely play through him. He feels like an accessory player to them more than not, except for game 2 when it was clear from the get-go he had something going. He didn't start out that way. So between the beginning and the end of the game, I feel like were his worst stretches of that game. But in between the second and third quarter was when he really got going. So there's always pros and cons to his play, I feel like, as we're going through this awkward him playing center phase. But I think the Cavs are at least seeing a blueprint for if they ever decide to move him to the 5 permanently, that there's promising stretches to build off of.
I'm in on his development throughout this series. I'm out on the fact that we're in year 3 and the playoffs is where this development is forced to be taking place. This is something that this is the development that we would have liked to have seen throughout year 2, throughout year 3. But I feel like because the Cavs have sort of allowed him to be comfortable in what he does, that he hasn't been forced out of his shell in a way that he has this series. And I think he's really shined. Especially, I think in that second half, he started the second half with taking shots on, taking the first 3 shots, made 4 points there, and I thought he did a good job of trying to get mismatches on him late in the game. And when he did get the mismatches, he really you know,
He was eating them. So
right.
it's the first time really where you've seen him just dominate mismatches consistently.
And he had that and one in the fourth quarter, I believe it was the fourth
Yeah.
quarter. That was huge at the time. So it's like, this is what we want to see. It's just that unfortunately now's the time where we're seeing this growth, whereas we'd like to, like, the playoffs should be like a final exam as opposed to like prep study for next year. And right now it feels like this is prep study for next year, and that's not really what we want.
Yeah. And I agree 100% with that, but I'll just kind of flip that and say that it is nice to see this growth in the playoffs, though. I wish that we would have seen it earlier, but it's nice that he's doing it on this stage. I mean, I'll take it. He was really rolling in that second half. In the second half, him and Garland both got it going. In the second half alone, Garland had 19 points. Mobley had 14 on 6 of 7 shooting. It felt like Boston had no answer for him, especially when he managed to get a switch, which is what makes it disappointing that he finished 6 of 7 in that half, because he probably could have taken 10 plus shots and really just continued to pound it down low because you were getting great results there. But it probably comes back to what you were saying, is that, hey, this is like the first time that they have tried to do this with Mobley. And I think it showed because they didn't get him the ball as often as they probably could have. I think that's been it's been an adjustment period for Mobley and the Cavs themselves, trying to find a way to get him involved offensively all season, and especially right now. It's where you wish you had those reps earlier in the year. But with that said, whatever sample size we've gotten, it's been very reassuring, I think.
One thing I also want to point out is, one, he's been dealing with his ankle injury for the last couple of weeks, and he's performing well. And he's also the only center and a lot of times the only forward on the court. And
the only guy above 6'5".
And he held like one of the best offenses in game 2, they had 94 points. In game 3, they had 106. Game 4, they had 109. Those are really good numbers, and I know that final score isn't a good metric for evaluating one player, but you don't hold the Celtics to those numbers if you're not getting really good play from your center, especially a team like the Cavs, who don't have a whole lot of good defenders, especially on the wing. They really overly rely on Mobley to provide the defense, to provide the rebounding, and I think he's really stepped up there. So this is an overall encouraging series, but it's like, we'd like to have seen this in January and February, or in 2023, 2022. So
yeah, no, I definitely get what you're saying there. Now let's focus a little bit on that Cavs supporting cast. Primarily, I want to talk about Max Strus, because he's had somewhat of a rough postseason. In many ways, Strus was someone that the Cavs couldn't afford to have playing below expectations. They really needed him to step up, especially when you look at the reason he was brought in to address some of those issues. He just hasn't been able to do it. Now, I want to start off by giving him credit in some areas, because I think we're going to be in on this topic, but I want to give him some credit quickly, because he did have Game 7 was a big moment for him, hitting a couple shots. He's had moments throughout this postseason where he's helped, but overall, are you in or out on Strus being a disappointment in the playoffs?
I am.
You want me to? I can start.
No, you can go for it.
Go ahead.
I'm in on Max Strus being in having an impact in this series, for the sense that even like overall, it's just Max Strus is the biggest benefactor of who he's also surrounded with and the options that are available to the Cavs. I think if Max Strus was even, say, on the Boston Celtics, he would probably not be seeing much playing time given the way that his form has been as of late. But like Jackson has kind of pounded home with Max Strus, he's one of the few players on the Cavs who can kind of check all the boxes for them. He's a player that if they remove him, you're going to have to play a player that kind of only excels in one facet of the game, if even using excelling is a proper adjective for that, because he can shoot. Even if he's not shooting, he's still rebounding. He's played fair defense on the wings. There isn't many options, especially when Okoro has kind of gone ice cold from shooting. They literally couldn't play him in the second half of this game when it seemed like they needed to. I would say overall, Strus, though, I was more aggravated with him just with his foul selection. I was really upset with his fouling out specifically, because there was no world. I tried thinking of it earlier today, like if there's any world in which that foul on Jaylen Brown was going to ever result in anything positive, and I mustered up 0 outcomes in which that was ever going to make sense. It kind of felt like the nail in the coffin for the team, that it was just, when you're playing 2K and you give up a turnover, your first thing you do is spam the steal button and give up a foul almost instantly.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned
it did allow Sam Merrill to come into the game.
True.
Which is always a benefit for
Didn't think about
Jackson.
that.
He will always be in on that. But I do want to mention his fouls, because we talked about this after, I want to say, one of the first couple games in the Magic series, where I said Strus looks the most flustered of anyone on the roster, despite the fact that he is kind of the one who has the most experience in a way. And I think those frustration fouls are a big sign of this, is that it just looked like he was frustrated. I mean, he just kept committing these really silly fouls where he gets beat off the dribble. Like Jaylen Brown had that end one where Strus is so clearly beat on the play, and he grabs his right arm, left arm, whatever it was, for no reason. Brown finishes an impressive shot, but it's like there's no reason to foul there. Even sometimes on the replays, like there was the one where Tatum just pump fakes and Strus flies by, and they didn't call this foul, but Strus is like grabbing his jersey as he's running by. And it's like, I guess the playoffs, you're being physical, but you're lucky you didn't get called for a foul there. Tatum misses the shot, gets his own rebound, and Strus fouls him on that play. And so there were so many plays where he's just very jumpy on defense. He looks flustered. He's committing these aggravating fouls that aren't helping the team at all. So I am in on Strus being, I really like Strus. I think he's a very helpful player. He is shooting 37% from downtown in this series, which is better than I thought. But I think he's been a little bit of a disappointment, especially the way he has composed himself.
I think Strus kind of represents a lot of issues that the Cavs as a team have, where they need specialists because all of their best players are really limited players in certain aspects, especially when Donovan Mitchell isn't out there. So you need Max Strus to be hitting a ton of threes because he's 6'5" and he's guarding wings. Like he is your wing, and he is very much not a wing. Like it's the same conversation we can have with Isaac Okoro, where he ideally is a 2 guarding 1s and 2s, not a 3 or 4 guarding 3s and 4. So that's kind of the same thing with Max Strus, where like he's out of position, and then he's also not hitting the specialized shots. So the value that he does bring kind of gets overshadowed by what the team is asking of him, and it's unfair on one hand, but it's also like there's not a lot of situations where Max Strus is going to come out a winner in what the Cavs need, and this is kind of more of an issue with the roster building as opposed to Max Strus. But Max Strus hitting 3 or 4 more threes this series changes the whole series.
Yeah,
I know it would have changed yesterday, so.
Yeah,
it's disappointing.
He had 5 threes in the first half, and then he went over 3 in the second half. I think it's fair to mention that him and Okoro are both being put in awkward positions and probably being relied upon more than any team should want to rely on. Karis LeVert too. Speaking of Karis, because
he's a point guard and a wing, and he's neither. Like for this team, like that's like what are we doing?
Well, speaking of that, and I think this applies to Strus too. This is something I've said a handful of times over the course of this series, but I think the Cavs still just have too many bad possessions. Strus had back-to-back plays where I get you're being aggressive and attacking the hoop, but he basically goes coast to coast against a half-court defense that's already set up, drives straight into Al Horford on one play. I don't remember who the other play was, but shots that just have no chance of going in very early in the shot clock. That is not a possession where the Cavs look back at and say, hey, we generated what we wanted there. Like, that was not a good look. Karis LeVert had however many step back threes. That's not what you want. And I'll give credit to the Boston defense because they jammed up everything else. But still, there has to be something better than 3 consecutive Karis step back threes. I think the Cavs still just have too many bad possessions that if you want to be a championship contending team, you're not going to have that many that boil down to what are we doing here?
Well, it is also fair to say that none of these guys are in their ideal role, even when the team is healthy. And when the team isn't healthy, it's just there has to be like 2 or 3 steps above what they should reasonably be asked. But it is frustrating in a game where the Cavs had a chance to win it. I wouldn't go as far as to say they should have won it, because I think that like
They would have
obviously
stolen it. They would have stolen that game from Boston.
they put themselves in a position to win it, but you needed to have some kind of heroics at the end. You needed a Dean Wade game like they got when they beat the Celtics in the regular season without Mitchell. Like they needed a insert name here game, and they just didn't get that, and that's okay. Like
Yeah.
it's a tall ask, but we can nitpick these things. But it is also like I don't know what you expect because this is just who they are, and they're not going to change to a certain degree.
I think that's fair to say. I want to round out this discussion by talking about the free throw disparity in this game because the Celtics did wind up with 17 more free throw attempts, and many people were upset with some of the calls. I'm going to start us off here because I think we need to stop complaining. I think the Cavs themselves need to stop complaining. There's the play where this one's been making the rounds on Twitter where Derek White, it's the dagger three from Jaylen Brown. Derek White is setting a clear moving screen there. Definitely a moving screen. I agree it should have been called, but you watch that play. The Cavs have been doing this thing all series long where I understand Garland is trying to tag and recover. They don't want to switch Garland onto anybody bigger than him. Everyone on the floor is bigger than him, so does it really matter at a certain point? But they refuse to switch, and this is a play where Derek White's setting a moving screen, Tatum's coming off of it, and Garland tags and then just completely leaves him. And not only that, but then he throws his arms up in the air because he's wondering why they didn't make a call on Derek White. Well, guess what? Now you're at a complete disadvantage, and Jaylen Brown gets an open three. And that's a play where, yes, they missed a call, but if the Cavs are just playing basketball and not complaining about the refs, the advantage is squandered. I think overall, the last thing that I want to say here, and then I'll stop rambling and let you guys jump in. The reason why the Cavs don't get many free throw attempts is because they don't attack the basket with strength. They don't go up strong. They don't play with force. I know we all hate to see Jason Tatum, even Franz Wagner in the last series, kind of initiate the contact with their forearms and drive in, and they're the ones being physical and they're getting rewarded with a call. That's just how this stuff works. When Darius Garland or Evan Mobley are dancing away from the basket and avoiding contact, you're just not going to get rewarded very often. It doesn't help that they also took, I think, 16 more three-point attempts. That plays a factor. I agree. There were some calls that didn't go their way. I think officiating across the board has been a little iffy, especially since the All-Star break where they kind of changed the rules on a whim and started allowing more contact. I think the Cavs have been impacted by that more than any other team because they're already a team that plays a little tentative in the paint, and I think we're seeing the effects of that.
I think it's also good to point out that I think Darius Garland's the foul that was overturned, the shooting foul where the layup, I forget who committed the foul. In that play, like Darius does this a lot. When he does try to make a layup, he doesn't go up, he goes out, and this is something that I think we yelled at Colin Sexton about, where like he's like running through the rim as opposed to like running up to the rim. And I know it's tough when you're 6'1" to do that, but it's like
if he stops his momentum and takes that contact, no chance he gets overturned.
Like, and we talk about Trae Young. Like Trae Young is his size. Trae Young has no athleticism.
Trae Young is going to put the brakes on and take that hit.
Right, and that's where like that's why I don't really buy a lot of the free throw stuff. And I think it is loser behavior after you lose to talk about that. And the Cavs, JB wanted to talk about it, and I'm somewhat okay if JB talks about it. But then, I mean, also Cavs media or Cleveland media could also, they kind of feed into this because they like asked Darius 10 questions about it. So he had to say something, but I do think it is loser behavior to which maybe it's loser behavior by the media. I didn't ask any questions. They don't let me do that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because people lose their minds over quotes sometimes. You have to remember the players and the coaches, a lot of times they're being asked to comment on these things. Darius didn't just step up to the podium and be like, let me explain how mad I am about the free throws.
JB did though, because I think they were like, what adjustments do you need? And he was like, well,
JB
they got $1 million. Yeah. And I do also think that if JB didn't get as mad about the calls, he would actually get a couple calls because I think that's human nature.
It's kind of how it works.
I think he's a little...
People are petty.
I think he's sometimes a little better about it now than he has been in the past, but he's still not good about it. So, that's something I think is also worth mentioning.
JB's like the king for head coaches of like the minute a foul is called, you go right to JB and Bally just has to deal with the fact he's dropping like 2 F-bombs at the ref and they're just keeping the camera panned on him the entire time. I feel like going back to Tony's point with the Garland complaint about the moving pick. That also came right after Garland was upset he didn't get the call when he was driving to the basket on Tatum, and he got pushed out for the same reason that Jackson was saying. Like Garland kind of avoided it by going under the rim, I think, and then when he didn't get the contact, he threw his arms up there, only to proceed to go down and complain about not getting it on the other end as well. I think that's kind of like what this Cavs team, like, there was a sequence, I think it was this game in like the second quarter, where Mobley thought he was getting fouled, and then on the other end, he was behind the transition for that very reason as well. I think overall, this team this game was won and lost in the last 2 minutes, and the simple reason was not the refs not giving the Cavs the free throws. The Cavs had open shots in that game. They took weird shots way too quick into the clock, and they just didn't have proper defensive movement, which these are all things that have plagued them through the first 4 games. It wasn't because Donovan Mitchell wasn't there. It was just the same issues popped up, but you didn't have Donovan Mitchell to bail you out of them with a good shooting night. I think bringing up the point that these are the same issues is really useful, even as Tony has 8 pixels on my screen. He, like, the Cavs, and I talked about this in my recap for Write Down Euclid, is that those last couple minutes, the Celtics, they had a clear identity of what they wanted to do. I know the Celtics aren't exactly the best clutch time team, but they have an idea of what they want. They know what shots they want to generate, and the Cavs don't. And I think it's like the Cavs have done a really good job of being adaptable all season, but they don't have anything to hang their hat on. They don't have like, this is a play we want to run. This is a spot on the floor we want to score from. And I think you kind of see that late in games where everything slows down and the Cavs are just like, well, you know, Max Strus might as well take the shot because somebody has to. And that's just not really what you want in those situations.
That's a great point. That's basically what I was attempting to say about the bad possessions that they have. They still don't have that bread and butter. We know what we want to do every possession or when it matters. Last thing I want to say, also, you said I was like pixels or whatever. I kind of cut out for a second. So if there's any technical difficulties, if anything in the audio or on the footage like skips a little bit, we apologize. I think the points you guys were making were still easy enough to understand.
Our production budget is $0
I don't know
and 0
I don't know what's
cents.
been happening recently.
Through the roof.
But we do have to wrap up here because Jackson's forcing me to watch a Star Wars movie. But I have 2 more points that I want to make very quickly on the referee issue. 1, Jaylen Brown being called for a common foul when he pulled Max Strus down, tripped him with his hands. That was crazy. Should have been an obvious flagrant, clearly unnecessary contact. I don't understand how that can be deemed necessary. The other one that we already mentioned briefly, the Horford play that was overturned. 1, if Garland just slams on the brakes and takes that hit, it's not getting overturned 100%. The other factor, and this is more an issue I have with the replay reviews and the challenges, when you watch that in live action, full speed, it's a foul 100% of the time. But when you stop it and you look in super slow motion, it does look like marginal contact because it is marginal contact. Horford really didn't hit Garland that hard, but all of his momentum's carrying him forward. Horford has 80 pounds on him. So sometimes marginal contact is all that's required for it to be a foul. So that one should not have been overturned. That was insane to me. Overall, listen, NBA officiating it's tough, and I think they get a lot of calls wrong. I don't think that it's rigged. I don't think that there's bias against the Cavaliers. I think they lost the game in other areas last night.
That Sam Merrill 3 at the end of the third quarter, that was
crazy as well.
He got legitimately checked by Jrue Holiday. That was crazy.
And
that would have been roughing the passer.
It seems like they focused the broadcast at least focused so much on the contact up top because it was a legal high five, but he's getting tackled on the bottom.
Right.
So I don't. That was a crazy one as well.
Who needs landing
There were some
space?
plays that were very bad. I agree 100%. There were some calls that were very bad, but I think we've seen that all throughout their NBA season, throughout the playoffs even. I think the officials are just – I do think officiating is in the dirt. It feels like things have gotten worse, especially since the All-Star break again, where I don't think they have any consistency in what is allowed on a game-to-game basis because of the way that Adam Silver, or whoever it was, kind of hit that hidden switch to change the way that we've been officiating games. I feel like more and more complaints have come since that.
I'm actually in on the hidden switch that he pressed. But
Well, so am I, but I think there's no consistency to it because of the
didn't-
way they did it in the middle of the season.
It didn't help the Cavs because the Cavs, like, it allows teams to be more physical or, like, more grabby on defense, which the Cavs didn't need to do that because they have Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, and that's not their game. So it didn't help the Cavs, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of In or Out. I want to thank everyone for watching or listening. Tomorrow could be the last episode of the season, so stay tuned for that. I'm not sure if we'll be recording right after the game or the next day. We will let you know. I'll keep you updated on Twitter. With all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, how are you celebrating George Lucas's birthday?